The symposium of the preceding evening had been a little too much for my nerves. I had a wretched headache, and was desperately drowsy. Instead of going out, therefore, to spend the evening as I had proposed, it occurred to me that I could not do a wiser thing than just eat a mouthful of supper and go immediately to bed. A light supper, of course. I am exceedingly fond of Welsh rabbit. More than a pound at once, however, may not at all times be advisable. Still, there can be no material objection to two. And really, it's between 2 and 3. There is merely but a single unit of difference. I venture perhaps upon 4. My wife will have it 5, but clearly she has confounded 2 very distinct affairs. The abstract number 5 I am willing to admit, but concretely it has reference to bottles of brown stout, without which, in the way of condiment, Welsh rabbit is to be eschewed. Having thus concluded a frugal meal, and donned my nightcap, with a sincere hope of enjoying till noon the next day, I placed my head upon the pillow, and thus, through the aid of the capital conscience, fell into a profound slumber forthwith. But when were the hopes of humanity fulfilled? I could not have completed my 3rd snore when there came a furious ringing at the street doorbell, and then an impatient thumping at the knocker, which awakened me at once. In a minute afterward, and while I was still rubbing my eyes, my wife thrust in my face a note from my old friend Dr. Ponderner. It ran thus: "Come to me, by all means, my good dear friend, as soon as you receive this. Come and help to rejoice. At last, by long persevering diplomacy, I have gained the assent of the directors of the City Museum to my examination of the mummy. You know the one I mean. I have permission to unswathe it and open it, if desirable. Only a few friends will be present. You, of course. The mummy is now at my house, and we will begin to unroll it at 11 tonight. Yours ever, upon honor." By the time I reached the upon honor, it struck me that I was as wide awake as man need be. I leaped out of bed in ecstasy, overthrowing all in my way, dressed myself with a rapidity truly marvelous, and set off at the top of my speed for the doctor's. There I found a very eager company assembled. They had been waiting me with much impatience. The mummy was extended upon the dining table, and the moment I entered, its examination was commenced. It was one of a pair brought several years previously by Captain Arthur Sabertash, a cousin of Ponotter's, from a tomb near Elethias in the Libyan mountains, a considerable distance from above Thebes on the Nile. The grottos at this point, although less magnificent than the Theban sepulchres, are of a higher interest. on account of affording more numerous illustrations on the private life of the Egyptians. The chamber from which our specimen was taken was said to be very rich in such illustrations, the walls being completely covered with fresco paintings and bas-reliefs, while statues, vases, and mosaic work of rich patterns indicated the vast wealth of deceased. The treasure had been deposited in the museum previously in the same condition in which Captain Sabretash had found it. That is to say, the coffin had not been disturbed. For 8 years it stood thus, subject only externally to public inspection. We had now, therefore, the complete mummy at our disposal. And to those who are aware how very rarely the unransacked antique reaches our shores, it will be evident at once that we had great reason to congratulate ourselves upon our good fortune. Approaching the table, I saw it on a large boxer case, nearly 7 feet long, and perhaps 3 feet wide, by 2 feet and a half deep. It was oblong, not coffin-shaped. The material was at first supposed to be the wood of the sycamore, platinus, but upon cutting into it, we found it to be pasteboard, or more properly papier-mâché, composed of papyrus. It was thus thickly ornamented with paintings representing funeral scenes and other mournful subjects, interspersed among which, in every variety of position, were certain series of hieroglyphical characters, indeed intended, no doubt, for the name of the departed. By good luck, Mr. Gliddon formed one of our party, and he had no difficulty in translating the letters, which were simply phonetic and represented the word Alamisteco. We had some difficulty in getting this case upon open without injury, but having at length accomplished the task, we came to a second coffin shape, and very considerably less in size than the exterior one, but resembling it precisely in every other respect. The interval between the two was filled with resin, which had in some degree defaced the colors of the interior box. Upon opening this latter, which we did quite easily, we arrived at the third case, also coffin-shaped, and varying from the second in no particular except in that of its material, which was cedar, and still emitted the peculiar and highly aromatic odor of that wood. Between the two and the second and the third case, there was no interval, the one fitting accurately within the other. Removing the third case, we discovered and took out the body itself. We had expected to find it, as usual, enveloped in frequent rolls or bandages of linen, but in place of these we found a sort of sheath made of papyrus and coated with a layer of plaster, thickly gilt and painted. Paintings represented subjects connected with various supposed duties of the soul, and its presentation to different divinities with numerous identical human figures, intended very probably as portraits of the persons involved. Extending from head to foot was a columnar, or a perpendicular inscription in phonetic hieroglyphs, giving again his name and titles and the names and titles of his relations. Around the neck, thus unsheathed, was a collar of cylindrical glass beads diverse in color, and so arranged as to form images of deities of the Scarabaeus, etc., with the winged globe. Around the small of the waist was a similar collar or belt. Stripping off the papyrus, we found the flesh in excellent preservation with no perceptible odor. The color was reddish. The skin was hard, smooth, and glossy. The teeth and hair were in good condition. The eyes, it seemed, had been removed, and glass ones substituted, which were very beautiful and wonderfully lifelike, with the exception of somewhat too determined to stare. The fingers and nails were brilliantly gilded. Mr. Glidden was of opinion, from the redness of the epidermis, that the embalmment had been effected altogether by asphaltum, but on scraping the surface with a steel instrument and throwing into the fire some of the powder thus obtained, the flavor of camphor and other sweet-scented gums became apparent. We searched the corpse very carefully for the usual openings through which the entrails are extracted, but to our surprise we could discover none. No member of the party was at that period unaware that entire or unopened mummies are not unfrequently met. The brain it was customary to withdraw through the nose, the intestines through an incision in the side. The body was then shaved, washed, and salted, then laid aside for several weeks, when the operation of the embalming properly so began. As no trace of an opening could be found, Dr. Panhoner was preparing his instruments for dissection when I observed that it was past 2 o'clock. Hereupon it was agreed to postpone the internal examination until the next evening, and we were about to separate for the present when someone suggested an experiment or two with the voltaic pile. The application of electricity to a mummy of 3,000 or 4,000 years old, at least, was an idea, if not very sage, still sufficiently original, and we all caught it at once. About 1/10 in earnest and 9 cents in jest, we arranged a battery in the doctor's study and conveyed thither the Egyptian. It was only after much trouble that we succeeded in laying bare some portions of the temporal muscle, which appeared to be less stony rigidity than other parts of the frame, but which, as we had anticipated, of course, gave no indication of galvanic susceptibility when brought in contact with the wire. This, the first trial, indeed, seemed decisive, and with a hearty laugh at our own absurdity, we were bidding each other good night, when my eyes happened to fall upon the mummy, were there immediately riveted in amazement. My brief glance, in fact, had sufficed to assure me that the orbs which we had all supposed to be glass, and which were originally noticeable for a certain wild stare, were now far covered by the lids, and that only a small portion of the tunica albuginea remained visible. With a shout, I called to attention the fact, and immediately became obvious to all. I cannot say that I was alarmed by the phenomenon, but alarmed, quote unquote, is, in my case, not exactly the word. It is possible, however, that but for the brown stout, I might have been a little nervous.